Good evening, guys. Nice to
They had
see
their
you.
mad half hour of a night.
Dogs for you, innit?
Ugh.
We are live. We are on ex Badlads podcast, take two. We were supposed to have James Jeffries tonight along with us, but something came up, family orientated, so he's had to pull out. So he does send his apologies. We'll try and get him on episode 3 as and when we do that. I'm with Ray Bishop, and we're just going to have a bit of a chat. It's a bit different to Live and Undrugged. We're just going to make it a bit more conversational, and if people on the feed want to drop in a few questions or whatever, if we see them, then I shall read them out and we shall discuss them. Oh, mate,
Brilliant.
how you going, Ray? You all right?
Yeah, not too bad, Jack. It's a pleasure to be on with you again, mate. I mean, we've done one before, didn't we? It was it was an honour. It's always a privilege to carry any sort of message. Whatever comes out, comes out.
I wanted the reason that I set up this is because you know I wanted to do this. Me and Dominic Neger started this back in 2021, I think it was, and we had this idea about getting blokes together, manly men, to talk about things that affect men, as you know, like mental health and physical and spiritual health and stuff like that. You know, and maybe have a laugh as well. You know, the first one was quite good. The second one, we got Frank Portinari and Kevin Lane, which was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, both good guys.
And then you agreed to come on and do this one. So, you know, it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. I want to show that. I get it because I saw this thing on TikTok that there's this culture where men don't talk about their pain, and they don't talk about the recovery, and they don't talk about the things that they're going through, and it's slightly toxic. You know, it's a TikTok that was asking, you know, who do you speak to, and it's all these men jumping on going nobody. And I guess I'm quite lucky to have people to talk to. I'm quite blessed to have people around me that I'm comfortable in talking to. I think it's important to be able to push aside that toxicity, don't you think?
Most definitely. And I think there's a reason God gave us 2 of these and 1 of these. I think the greatest skill any of us can have, which I can only speak from experience, I've had to learn through bitter experience, is to learn to listen. The most important thing is when we say we're never alone or you're not alone, we tend to feel alone if we don't listen. And the antidote to any sort of critical thinking or chaos in the mind is identification. Because when we go through it, and I can only speak for me, when I go through it, you know, you feel alone. You feel like I'm the only one who feels like this. I'm the only one who thinks like this. I'm the only one who's experienced this, whatever crisis that be in life at that time, relationships, whatever. And I've learned one of the greatest skills is to learn to listen. You know, it's all very well being able to talk to people, but we must learn to listen. And that is an art. It's an art to be able to listen.
It is. It's not easy though, is it? It's because you have all these things around you, and
yeah,
I don't think I think that we can get stubborn, and we become our own enemy. And like, if we don't want to listen to somebody, we won't. But the people I've found in my experience, the people that we don't want to listen to, are the wisest ones.
Well, you know. Was it the Buddha once said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear? That has been my experience. I've been very fortunate in life through my own collective chaos, as it were, that I've had a lot of interventions, as you know, Jack, having spent most of my adult life behind bars until I sort of found redemption and and a route out to reform. But I've had some great teachers along the way. Had I have listened in the beginning, I'd have probably learned a lot more, but I didn't. But any wisdom that I possess today is all what I've learned from other people and all what has hit a chord in me that I was able to listen and just pass that on freely. That's the duty. You know, I often say that to people when I do talk sometimes. People say, oh, you seem really wise or whatever. And I say, none of it's mine. You know, I'm not Kung Fu Panda. I'm not this wise, all-seeing eye. But it's just a collective knowledge that we all have. And if we pass it among us freely, they say, like, no man's an island. We're surrounded by sea. But yeah, you pick things up along the way, mantras that you learn to use in daily life, or what I've learned to use in daily life. Like, you know, when people say, sometimes you just got the art of letting go. How do you let go? Literally, they say like that. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? But it's sort of like a wise person said to me once, and this has always stuck with me. He said, it will all be okay as long as you are okay. Now, you have to think about that statement. Now, what he meant by that to me is, for example, when I've gone through it with, let's go to say the most painful thing most of us can encounter. Bereavement is obviously one. I'll touch on that because I've got a lot of experience of that. But relationship breakdowns. When a relationship breaks down, when you love someone and for whatever reason the relationship breaks down, it's absolutely devastating, and people fall apart. You know, I've had that in the past where I fell apart. And a wise person said to me, you know, when they say give time, and time is a healer and all this sort of stuff, he said it will all be okay as long as you are okay. And what I take from that is that when I'm going through it, for whatever reason, I go what's called back to basics. The simple things. I try to go to bed at a reasonable time. I try to eat properly. I make sure I keep my personal hygiene good. The basics, you know, to sound technical, the Erickson hierarchy of needs: food, shelter, warmth. Focus on the fundamentals. That way I'm okay. And the rest will be okay. It tends to work itself out. Most of the life's traumas and the way we deal with them is actually caused by our struggle against them and trying to find a path through, or trying to be in control of a situation that we are not truly in control of. And that's what feeds the pain, you know, for me.
But for me too, it's like I've been around certain anonymous programs since I was 14 years old. You know, well, that's an awful age to know that you're a.
Sorry, Jack. It's these.
That's all right.
If they hear a dog in the car out the back, they'll bark. Be quiet.
That's all right.
They'll be all right. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. I don't mind dogs. No, I mean, you know, I was awfully young when I was taken into that program, and I've learned a lot of wisdom. You know, it's all shared. But the one thing that I could never get my head around until this time, I'm coming up to 9 years, as you know. And,
fantastic. Well done.
You know, it's like the one thing I couldn't get my head around was surrender, and surrender to win. Because it was like the whole thing about surrender, you know, my mantra was always no retreat, no surrender. And it was, that's a toxic way to think as well. And I always thought surrendering was for cowards. But once I learned that surrendering to win is, you know, like when you're at war, when you're at battle, and the threat to life is, you know, you're going to lose your whole regiment if you don't step back, then you know you have to surrender. You have to do that so you can go back to fight more battles. Once I got my head around that, I was able to sort of start stepping out into different thinking and critical thinking and constructive thinking and stoicism and things like that. for me, it's a massive, especially as a man of faith as well, as you know, to surrender our lives to the will of God as we understand him, is a big thing.
Well, surrender is the route to peace. And if you've been around the anonymous programs, you'll know in the big book of, I think it's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a line where it actually says, we have ceased fighting anyone or anything. We will know peace such as few people do. And I think what they mean by that is that, when we say, I'm going to do, for example, addiction, which I have experience of, we're going to do battle against our addiction. It's a fight you will never win. It's not about doing battle. And the paradox is surrender to win. It's about making peace with it, making peace with yourself. Acceptance being the first key to freedom. Once we can accept we've got a problem, like a drink problem or a drug problem or something like that, acceptance, make peace, and then you cease fighting. And you can learn to live with it and learn to deal with it. I mean, I've been clean for a number of years myself. I've been around recovery programs like your good self for perhaps 23, 24 years. I've been clean well over a decade now. And I don't do battle with it, Jack. I don't do battle. I accept that that's how I am. I accept that I can't use drink or drug successfully. It has an effect on me that maybe it doesn't have on certain people. Certain people can, and that's their right. But I've sort of accepted I can't, and I've reached a place in my life where I think even if I could, why would I? Why would I? I don't feel the need to pollute my mind with that stuff. I'm very cautious about what I put into my body. I don't watch horror films, for example, because I don't think they're good for the mind. Like some people like horrors and things. I'm not knocking anyone who does, but I don't watch that sort of stuff. It's because I don't. You are what you eat. You are what you eat physically. You are what you eat spiritually, and you are what you eat emotionally. And I think life is about trying to not set yourself up for a fall. That's what recovery is about, basically, isn't it? It's about trying to prevent yourself picking up again and going off into that life again, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah. I mean, I'm really blessed. My recovery is nothing short of a miracle. I couldn't give up. I couldn't put it down, and I find myself in a crack house at 10 o'clock at night, sat up against the wall, 26th of June 2014, in a crack house in the centre of Norwich, in some, large story flats. And I said, God, I can't do this no more. So either take away my thirst, my hunger for these drugs, or take my life, take me now.
Yeah. And that is the crux of problem drinking and problem using is suicide, one fix, one pill at a time. We learned that very early on in recovery, don't we?
We do. But he put me to sleep.
It's suicide. We are committing suicide.
Yes, I do agree with that. I've been at that point where I just wanted to die, the first time was many, many years ago. You're talking 30 years ago, and then, a few times in between, and then being homeless and addicted to crack. And, I think I probably would have thrown myself off them flats that night, to be honest, had I not fallen asleep, but I did. And when I woke up, I haven't used the day since. He took away that, he took away that, that want, but I can't get too complacent about it, because if I do, I know that it's going to ruin me. So, you have to be aware that, you see, what people don't understand is that addiction isn't really about drugs and it isn't about drink. Addiction is, you know, because if it was, you could take away the drugs and you could take away the drink, or you could take away the gambling, or you could take away, you know, whatever, and then you'd be all right. But it's not. It's a disease of disconnection. It disconnects you from life. It disconnects you from your family. It disconnects you from yourself, from your friends, from God. And then you end up on your ass, broken, praying.
Well, they do say with like I mean addiction, they do say it's a physical illness, a spiritual illness, and a mental illness. And the drug use or drink use or gambling or whatever we do to the point of obsession and compulsion is just a very small part of it. It's a symptom. They say if you are a problem user, a problem drinker, a problem drug taker. I mean, I'm not here to tell anyone they're an addict, alcoholic, or whatever. That's something what only we can tell ourselves. But if you are, and if you want to know why you use, just stop. Just stop. And then you will know why you use. And it's because of our thinking. Yes, I'm a great believer that it lives in our emotional world and how we deal with emotions. We're just a little bit different than normal people in that regard, that we take something, for example, a relationship breakdown, and rather than listen to the proper internal messages, our head starts lying to us and starts saying it's because of us. It's because we're unlovable. It's because we're not as good looking as this one, or not as good as that person, or this and that. And it all taps into self-esteem, which is not the truth. It's a lie. A relationship could go bad for a multitude of reasons, But we tend to twist up a bit in our head. We get a strange sort of thinking. We believe the lie. And then it seems like a good idea to reach for our antiseptic, our antidote, which is our drug use. And here's one to think, you know, people say, I used to drink and take drugs because I like the way they make me feel. Well, let's have a look at that. Not once did I ever say, I want to get out of my feelings. I said, I want to get out of my head. And therein lies the problem between the social user and the problem user. The problem user, person with a propensity towards addiction, is the person who has that strange sort of thinking, and it's that we want to get out of our mind. It's like literally putting a shotgun under your chin and blowing your head off. You don't know how it'll make you feel, but you know it'll numb the thoughts. You'll think different. And that's why I used drugs for a long time. Coupled with not being able to deal with my own emotional world, drugs turned me into a raving lunatic. And if I look at my whole history of offending, yes, I was involved in hard criminality and organised crime at one period of my life. But the fuel in what fueled the flames was an inability to deal with my own emotional world, which was quite childlike and quite immature. You know, my emotional EQ was very low, but my intellectual IQ was quite high, and it fueled my criminality to the point where I became, as you know, at one point one of the most wanted men in Britain through series of armed robberies and escapes from prison and everything else. And I look back at that whole period, and if I'm to be brutally honest, drugs, addiction, and an inability to deal with that at the time fueled the person I was. 100%. And I'm not unique.
Well, no, it does. It fuels your darkest thoughts. You know, I lived on trauma. Trauma was my gateway, you know, and it was that not only undiagnosed trauma, but it was trauma that I wouldn't even acknowledge. So it was unacknowledged trauma. So it was trauma of childhood, trauma of finding out I was adopted, trauma of finding myself being abused by adults in the special school system, the trauma of losing friends to addiction, the trauma of losing friends to suicide. And it's not acknowledging it and just trying to push my way through with that toxic thinking, you know, and selfish thinking, I think, you know, because it was like the only thing I can think about is myself.
Yeah.
And I would grieve for people. And like you said, grief is a It's a massive one, isn't it? It's a massive one. I don't think you never actually move on from grief. You only ever move forward.
But grief is a very difficult one. And when people say, you'll get over it in time, I don't think you ever do. I think you learn to live with it. I'm not one of these people that would ever say to someone, you'll get over it, because you never do. Not with grief. With grief, you learn to live with it. I mean, anyone who's ever lost anyone real close, I mean, it's massive. But to go back to what you were saying about trauma, Jack, and like the drugs and all this sort of becoming the comfort blanket. I mean, we all have trauma in life, everyone, and trauma can be the gateway in. And what you experience from your own honest and humble admission is deep, deep trauma, and it's understandable, and it's really very, very common. Having spent 3 years. Over 3 years in a therapeutic prison, as you know, I did. I mean, everything's in my book. I wrote my autobiography, Outlaw, which is out. It's I speak a lot about the therapy I've done, and in the therapy, the common thread to most of the men that were in there for murder, most of the men that were in there for real serious acts of violence, etc., was deep childhood trauma. Most of them, and most of them were products of the care system, and that has been something that has really shocked me and really saddened me. And to this day, it's something that I feel really passionate about. I'm really passionate about the abuse that went on in care homes. It's just horrific, and I believe it still goes on, Jack.
Of course it does. It doesn't just happen in care homes, though. It happens everywhere where there's vulnerable people. Yeah. I was a 11, 12-year-old kid that was said to be low intelligence. I wasn't low intelligence. I was dyslexic, but like in the 80s, they knew what dyslexia was, but they didn't diagnose anybody with it. And I know I had some form of ADHD or autism. I learned differently to other people. I consume knowledge, but I couldn't get it down on paper. So I was seen as low intelligence, which meant that I was seen as thick, always just a bit thick. I had a family that thought I was a bit thick, that treated me a bit different. And because of that, I was put into the special school system. And the special school system, you've got social workers, you've got teachers, and the way that I dealt with, I've been honest about this all the way through my podcasting career, for 3 years now, that, the way that I dealt with finding out I was adopted was I had this existential crisis at 8 years old, not knowing who I was. So I learned to lie very well. And I would lie, and they would see me as nothing but a liar. And it wasn't even like little lies. It was massive lies that couldn't even possibly be true. But I had this trauma that I didn't even know how to deal with. So they took advantage of that. You're a liar. Nobody's ever going to believe you if you say anything. So you might as well just resign yourself to the fact that you're going to get raped.
Well, I was one of these strange people. See, I get that. I'm a product of the 70s, and because my parents my dad was sadly an alcoholic who died quite young, but my mum was a very strict Irish Catholic. So I went to Irish Catholic schools. And in the 70s and early 80s, they were actually quite brutal places. I'm not going to knock them because they were fantastic in terms of education, but very strict. And we still had corporal punishment where you used to get caned, etc., etc. I used to get hit for being left-handed because I used to do things with my left hand. It was a punishable offence. It was seen as not being right to be left-handed. It's crazy. So I learned to write with my right hand. Today, I still write with my right hand, but I'm actually predominantly I do most stuff with my left hand because I'm naturally left-handed. Yeah. But I actually write my right hand because I had to learn to do it as a kid. So I'm one of these weird people that you could say is ambidextrous, but I can't actually write my left hand because I never learned. But I can do everything else with my left hand, and I tend to do everything with my left hand.
I'm right. I'm dominant myself. this is I suffer with paresthesia anyway, so I have only got like 90% feeling on this side. That's a product of MS and stuff. But like I'm totally right on dominant. So when I nearly lost my hand in the revolving door at Woolworths in Fareham in 2000, you know, that was really difficult for me. You know, they thought I might have been left-handed at one point. Then they thought I might have been ambidextrous, but I just learned that I couldn't write with either of my hands. So, you know, but there wasn't that education there. You know, the sort of education I went through was, I recently found out do you remember the National Record of Achievement?
Yeah.
I found that out. I've got two. It's for those about our age in the mid 40s, early 50s. It was this A4 burgundy folder with National Record of Achievement written on the front, and most people would get like their exam certificates and put in like that, but we didn't, because it was a school that didn't focus on that sort of education. Yeah. I had a certificate on counting to 100 and using a tape measure. I've got a certificate on changing a fuse in a plug, a certificate on riding a 50cc moped, a certificate for climbing, caving, canoeing, abseiling, Army youth team. They rewarded bad behavior with these good things. So by the time I left school, I could barely read or write my name, but I could adequately teach kayaking, canoeing, sailing, things like that. So, you know, they focused on that. I also think it was so, you know, because we used to go away pretty much every month at the weekend with the school, or I used to go caving and stuff in the Yorkshire Moors and stuff with some of the teachers. And I believe that, you know, I don't think I was the only one that was going through it. I think there were other kids that were going through it.
Of course.
But, you know, they tried to prepare you for sort of that real world. Because I grew up in a mining town, surrounded by mining towns. So when they all closed down in 84, 85, it all got brought to the doorstep, and the, you know, the schools suffered and the town suffered because the market suffered because the men weren't spending money on the market. And
yeah,
you know, this whole thing about depression and lots of suicides in the towns. And it was, so I grew up in that, a working men's Yorkshire.
Well, so I've always wondered as well. I mean, you know, I get that, and I can imagine how difficult that was economically. But I can only say my own sort of identification that would be that I grew up in sort of semi-poverty as well, a very inner city council estate. I was a product of Thatcher's Britain, and we know what that was like for our sort of generation. And it was fucking tough, you know, there's no doubt about it. It was tough. But I also look at it like this. I mean, I was only born 25 years after the Second World War. And I often scratch my head and think about that, because I've just come back from Auschwitz. I went and paid my respects at Auschwitz on like a bit of a spiritual tour. I recommend anyone should go there, you know, if you go for the right reasons, not to just be a ghoul, but to go there. But cut a long story short, I think of the generation that we were raised by. I mean, these were raised by people who would all have lost people in the war, who would have all experienced the hardships of the war, who would have all experienced plenty of soldiers coming back with PTSD, which we get these terms now, but there was none of this when we were young.
Shell
you know, I mean, they're very, so, you know, there was a lot, as we know, men were the bosses in the house, and there was a lot of angry men when I was a kid. That's what I remember. But, you know, my granddad, for example, my granddad was in the RAF. He was a gunner. He wasn't a pilot. My nan lost both her brothers in the Second World War. She had two brothers. She lost both of them, one in Dunkirk and one died of malaria in Malaysia, because a lot of soldiers actually died from disease. They wasn't used to these things like malaria and TB and all this stuff out there. So she lost both her brothers. So she was very sort of, neurotic because she'd been through the trauma of war and she'd seen service in the WRVS. She was working at Woolwich Arsenal. My granddad had seen shootings and whatever because he was firing at the Luftwaffe coming down the Thames. He'd experienced all that. So my memories of my nan and granddad, although they used to tell us stories, looking back now of an adult Ed, I could see they were fucking traumatized. They were traumatized from war, you know, and there was no one. There was, how'd you deal with it? How'd you deal with that? You know,
it was different, wasn't it, back then? It was so different.
Yeah,
because you know, our parents' generation, they had to. It was necessity and need. You know, my grandfather was born in 1900.
yeah.
You know, my dad is 80 odd now. He was born in 1939, start of the war.
Yeah.
You know, my mum was born 41, 42.
Yeah.
You know, my adopted parents. So they had this whole demeanor about them. And especially being from Yorkshire as well. My dad, a hairy-assed railway man. My mum, a social worker. So, you know, my dad was little, but he was strong. And then you've got to think, you know, I was 8, 9 years old when the mines got closed down. So, you know, I don't really remember too much of it. I remember bits of it. But what that must have been like for men like my dad, you know, when even going down south, you know, the steel mills closed, and then, you know, you go a bit further south, and, you know, if you can't get coal, a lot of the mills, like the textiles, which is the southern part, they can't run. So, I mean, it affected the whole country.
Very much so. And it has to this day. I mean, I think this is a lot of problems in society today. I mean, we've created this massive, massive divide in this country where there's the haves and the have-nots. Here's an example. I was working in North London yesterday, putting a scaffold up in a place called Kentish Town, which when I was young was considered quite a slummish area. I was looking in the window of the estate agents, just looking at flats and things to see what the sort of rental price is up there. Do you know, to rent a 2-bedroom flat in Kentish Town, which was a slum, £650 a week. A week. This is £2,500 a month to rent a 2-bedroom flat. And we've created this with, dare I say it, you know, and this is not, I'm not racist or anything like that, because, you know, my parents were migrants. You know, migrants have done fantastic for this country. But I think with the freedom of movement and just bolstering the population by 5 million over the last 10 years and not having that's not their fault. They're coming here for a better life, and they're coming here to do good, most of them, and they're fantastic assets to the country. The problem is the infrastructure. We haven't built enough homes, you know. There's not enough jobs for the youngsters that pay a decent enough wage for them to be self-sufficient, and they know it. Young people are not stupid, and I think what we've done is we created a generation now where they're actually quite mentally ill and they don't know it, and that's why they're running around stabbing each other and everything, because it's the get rich or die trying, and this is the product of capitalism. When you look at, but, you know, these things are created by poverty, and it's the haves and have-nots. If you've got money in this country, it's a great country. If you have not got money in this country, it's getting like a third world country. It really is.
It is, and you're seeing it. I mean, you know, I live in quite a middle-class town in Norfolk. You know, a beautiful little town, but. You know, when I first moved there, you didn't really see that sort of poverty gap. Obviously, there was, but it wasn't as apparent as it is now. I mean, you know, my church are involved in, you know, today I took the kids down to something called Fish at my church, which is fun in the school holidays, which is for families that don't have a lot of money, and they feed they feed you and the kids. And they do fun things. So they taught the kids Bhangra dancing. They got a Bhangra dancer in, and then taught them Bhangra dancing today. We run a food kitchen. You know, as you know, I met my wife at a food bank. She was serving and I was homeless.
Brilliant.
You know, we run a food kitchen where you can go in and you can, it's like a food bank. You can get like bits of food. We're going to be starting up this thing where you can go in and you can do like a weekly shop, but slightly cheaper than you'd be able to get it in the supermarket. So it will save you money in the long run. You know, but our town had never really seen that up until, I suppose, the pandemic. You know, we had food clubs, and you know, we were sort of meeting that need. And you know, my friend Elizabeth Louis, she started that off and started doing the fish. You know, her and her husband, absolutely lovely couple. I think a lot about the community. She deserves an OBE, I'm telling you, for what she did during the pandemic.
Maybe she'll get one. You don't know. I mean,
she needs to.
But you know what? No one needs. This is the thing. Here's a famous saying. What I've learned, and it's. I don't know if it's a biblical saying, but it's definitely a religious saying, and it's those who pray in public have received their reward. People like your good partner, and people like yourself, people like me, and a lot of people that I meet. We do it for us because we know we do it because it's right. I don't want any reward or recognition or anything. You know, I have no intentions of getting any rewards or recognition. Not to mention not to knock anyone who does, but I made this contract, me personally, with a higher power of my own understanding, and I said my contract is between me and him.
Yep.
That as simple as that, you know, and that's how I approach my life, Jack. And I'm very charitable, you know. It's just in me because I know what it's like to have nothing. I do know what it's like to have nothing. So I've never forgot that. So I try to do what's right as and where I can. You know, I'm against a lot of charities because I think a lot of charities are just businesses now. And what they do is actually pay their CEOs massive amounts of money. Very little of what you actually give goes to the charity. Here's a classic one. I even went to a charity shop one day and I gave some clothes into a charity shop. And, you know, without being cocky or flash, I went for a little phase where I was buying lots of nice designer stuff and whatever else. And I gave a lot of clothes to this charity shop. And I went back in less than a week later and I didn't see one item on the shelf. So what had happened to them? Where did they go? You know, I gave them. So now what I do is if I have a clear out of my wardrobes, I take them to a rehab or I take them to a homeless shelter and I give it that way myself, you know. At least that way I know it's going to the right place rather than someone plucking the eyes out of it and putting it on one of these websites where they can earn a few bob off it, you know, which I've got no problem with as long as the money goes back into the charity. But I know and you know it doesn't, Jack. The volunteers in the bloody shop, not all of them, but they do nick them. And I know this person one. I went in there again at another time and somebody had handed in a World War II flying jacket, which was obviously worth a lot of money. And I overheard the man saying, "Oh, you want to see what came in the other day? Oh, yeah, I took it straight home." I thought, I bet you did, you know, because you could probably sell that for a few £100 on bloody eBay. Yeah. So, you know.
The thing about, like, charity shops these days, I love charity shops. I take the kids to charity shops pretty much every weekend, you know, and let them spend a couple of pounds in there. Yeah. But they're getting ridiculous for prices. Yeah, like absolutely ridiculous for prices. There's one local and somebody's giving them a Mega Drive, and you know that probably pick up about you know in the condition that it's in the original Mega Drive, up 100 and odd quid with a game, and they've got it like 90 quid just for the Mega Drive. Oh, yeah. Because these people go in and they have people go in, don't they, and price them up. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. VHS, as you know, as you can see, you know, I'm a massive film fan and VHS fan. Some of these shops, a lot of them don't take them anymore, but there's a couple in our town that are trying to charge £20-30 for
them. Well, I think charity shops, this is my point entirely. I think what a lot of charity shops, and I don't want to speak ill of charity because I know a lot of people who work in and around them have got good intention, but I think what they are doing, a lot of them, has lost the primary focus. It's not just about raising money. It's also about supporting the people who can't afford to go and buy, new clothes and things like that. You know what I mean? So there has to be a balance, surely. If you're going to go in, someone who goes and shops in a charity shop, not everyone, but they might be doing that because they genuinely can't afford to buy their kids new clothes. And we all know what it's like raising children. I mean, they grow out of a pair of trainers in 3 weeks, you know. It should be, you know, make these things affordable, you know.
Yeah, across the board, you know. It's not easy. I mean, we've got to chip in, haven't we, and just sort of help each other. We need that sort of community spirit, but nobody's got it anymore. Everybody's in it for themselves.
Well, I think we're being engineered this way. I think a lot of what's going on in society today is actually being engineered. You know, with the price rises and all this sort of stuff and the energy crisis and all this stuff, Project Fear, designed to get us all out working all the hours God sends and everything else. I mean, I just come back from Poland, you know, and let me tell you something. I felt safe walking around the town centre of a night time. I didn't see hardly any graffiti. I didn't see hardly any police. I spoke to a Polish people out there and I said, don't you have a problem with crime? I said, very little crime problem. And I said, what about your energy crisis, fuel crisis? He didn't know what I was talking about. You know, he didn't know what I was talking about. And we're led to believe that this is worldwide. Right? It's not. It's not. It's a complete lie. And what's happening and what the news and that are not talking about is our energy companies in this country, like British Gas, E.ON, and all these companies are all owned by foreign nations. British Gas is owned by France and Germany, I think. I think E.ON's owned by Germany. These are all owned by foreign governments. So we're being charged the hilt at absolute maximum prices in this country to subsidise their country so their fuel bills are not as high if there is this rising cost. But it's all orchestrated, like with OPEC, the energy nations, how much oil they produce, Saudi Arabia and everything else. It's all designed and orchestrated to keep us impoverished, because the only way a conservative, particularly conservative, capitalist government can grow the economy is by making people work all the bloody hours God sends. And if people are earning good money, they're not going to want to work, are they? So it's designed to keep us impoverished, you know. It really is bad. There's so much disparity of wealth in this country. It's sickening.
It is. And, you know, I've been on, you know, the low end of it, being homeless and, you know, 2012, 13, 14. And you know, it was bad back then. So
yeah,
imagine, I can only imagine what it's like now. When we're now, like I said, you know, quite a middle class town, but we're now starting to get beggars in town.
It's heartbreaking when you hear nurses and professional people are having to use food banks, and the choice of heating or eating is apparent for millions of households in this country. It's not just a slogan. It is really as bad as that. I mean, I personally know people that can't afford to put their heating on and they've got children. It's fucking horrendous. In 2023, in one of the richest nations in the world, where have we gone wrong? Let me tell you where we've gone wrong. We don't have a problem with poverty in this country. We have a problem with corporate greed. We have a problem with greed. We have a problem with profits. We have a problem, and all this can be traced back to Margaret Thatcher and the privatisation and the decimation of industry in this country. Like you spoke about, mining. We've got enough coal in this country to go back to running half the country on coal, or at least the power stations. Okay, there will be a negative in terms of emissions, but we will be able to power the country at a more affordable cost. And I don't believe for 1 second in 2023 they can't produce some form of filter system that will filter out a lot of them harmful emissions, but they don't want to because there's not enough profit in it. Profit in it.
They've pulled our stations down.
If they were hell bent and deadly serious about the population and the rise in energy costs, they would make solar energy more affordable. Now, I do a lot of work in the solar sector. As you know, I've got a company and I do a lot of work for solar panel companies. What strikes me is that our clientele and the houses that we tend to do all tend to be very wealthy people who can afford the fuel anyway, but they're having all the solar energy fitted and all that to bring their fuel bills down there. Make that affordable for tenants, for council tenants, for people who fucking need it. It really angers me. You know, if they were really serious about this stuff, that's what they would do. And the payoff is that there's actually a surplus that goes back into the grid from them solar panels, because if you put panels on your house, you wouldn't use that much electric. So the surplus would go back into the grid anyway, but they don't want to do it. Why not? Because, of course, look at the profits of Shell, BP, and all these people. And this is, in a nutshell, this is what is creating the crime in this country. Crime comes from poverty.
Yep.
That's where crime comes from, pure and simple. And I speak from experience.
Yeah, you know? Of course it does. I mean, back in 2005, I worked for what's called an NDC, New Deal for Communities. The DWP and the benefits people decided in there, you know, they wanted to put into communities. So they wanted to help these community trusts to build better communities in poorer areas. So I was part of this thing, this NDC called the Nelm, North Earlham, Lightman and Malpit Trust. And it was basically put in, they gave, it was something like £40 million to like several different things. And, you know, they built in Norwich, they built a fire station, care home, a housing estate, a few shops, and then they put it in one area, and then they brought business into that area so that when it capped off in 2015, it would be self-running and self-serving.
Yeah.
And that was good because they were trying to do things in communities like run educational programs for people. You know, I got to go all over the country to do things about disability and, you know, all sorts. And it was great. But you don't have anything like that anymore.
No.
They're not bothered. You know,
it's sad.
Prince's Trust. They barely run that anymore.
It's been orchestrated this way. Here's a classic example. When I was a child, in my home area, there was 5 hospitals. There's now one that serves a much wider area than where I grew up as well, because it serves the whole borough of Greenwich now, whereas there used to be 5. And the population has risen by over, you know, 500,000 in Greenwich alone. You know, here's an example of how bad and dire it is in Greenwich. There is 120,000 families waiting to get on the social housing register. 120,000 families, be it for whatever reason. Now, it's very easy to say, well, they make their own better way. Listen, people can fall into hard times or need social housing for a whole multitude of reasons. And people can start off in a good base of social housing, and who knows where they'll be 10, 15 years down the line with work, buy their own home, move on. All this stuff can go on. But what's happened is we've created, it serves someone their purpose to have one half of the country renting, and that's what they want. The people with money, because of the pensions being unstable, the risk of the pension funds going again like it did before, that it suits them to invest their money in property and have astronomical rents where people have got no disposable income, so they can't get out of poverty and they're caught in the poverty trap. Doesn't mean they don't work hard or they're not good people. They're just not privileged and don't come from the privileged place where they may have inheritance or whatever else, because we all know a lot of people with extreme wealth in rich areas are there through one reason. It is not always through hard work. It's a fucking lie. A lot of people in these positions are in that position because they had big inheritances from mum and dad when they passed, or nan and granddad, or whatever else, and they were able to get on the property ladder with massive funds. Not everyone, I'm not across the board, but we do know that happens, especially in the upper classes. It's the money gets passed through generations, and they don't understand how hard it is for people to even get on the property ladder. Someone like myself, who's, I'm 51 years of age now. I've been very privileged. I know what it's like to have nothing, and I've never forgot. I'm a successful businessman. I have a good business. I employ people, etc., etc. And I find it hard for me to get mortgages now. They want me to put down astronomical amounts of money, and how is anyone supposed to do it, Jack? And it should be everybody's right to own their own home, and and it is so sad, so sad.
It is. I think people like Kevin Lane have got the right idea by
the modular homes.
Yeah, the modular homes.
Yeah, great idea, and a great product.
Brilliant idea.
Great product.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some of the videos of them building. They take a few days to go up.
Well, I'm very up on current affairs, Jack. I'm actually a bit of a nerd. I watch the Prestons, and I keep in touch with current affairs and whatever else. I like the debate, but it's Barratt Homes, for example, were awarded £250 million grant by the government to build social housing 5 years ago, to build affordable housing. How many homes do you think they've provided so far for that 250 million? 12 homes. That's not to say they're not still building homes, but the social housing that they were awarded the 250 million pound grant for, they've built 12. Now, you cannot tell me there is not corruption in the upper echelons of this government and the policymakers and the councils. If somebody awarded a 250 million pound grant can only build 12 homes. Exactly. Give me 250 million pound, I will build 1,000 homes over the next 5 years.
Well, there's houses going up everywhere. Every bit of land they can find, they're putting up houses. Our town's gone from a relatively small town to now verging onto the next town.
Yeah.
That's how many houses have gone up. They bought all the floodplains and put houses on stents.
Yeah. But usually poor quality housing, Jack, and because I'm in the building trade, as you know, within 10, 15 years, these houses all have problems because they're not built right. They're built cheap.
Well, they build, hundreds, thousands of houses, and you get, 10 for social housing?
But they build cheap and they sell high. Because a lot of these houses, and what they do is they overinflate the value. Because I went to look at a house recently in West Kingsdown, and they wanted 375,000 for it, and and it was only a small little 2-bedroom house, and that was their valuation. I went and I had an independent valuation done, and they said 325. No more. So it was overinflated by 50,000 already. Reason being, they want you to put 10, 15% in. If there's a negative, if there's a credit crunch again, any negative equity will then be with you. So the banks are not taking any risks, and it's wrong. Tell me why people who are living in social housing, who are living in private landlord housing that can afford the rent, barely, they could afford the mortgage.
Yeah.
Why are we not allowing these people to buy these premises? That money will be their pensions, etc., etc. So they won't need state-funded pensions. Their pension could be in their fucking house. Why are we not doing it? Why? Because of greed once again. When Margaret Thatcher created the right to buy scheme in the 1980s, it was a wonderful thing for council tenants because they were able to build their homes. But the sting in the tail was they never replenished that stock. And her real motive for doing that was so that her friends and cronies could buy the social housing in all the fantastic districts like Westminster, Knightsbridge. Every borough in London had social housing back then. And she done it in such a way that her friends bought Some of them bought hundreds of properties in areas like Westminster, Regent Street. Believe it or not, because I've looked into this, there was even social housing in Regent Street above flats, and her cronies and friends bought them and made millions. There was a reason why Margaret Thatcher spent the last 3 years of her life in the Ritz Hotel on a whole floor paid for by, I can't say their names, it make me libelous, but like private investment company, two certain brothers paid for that for 3 years at probably a cost of 10 million quid. There's a reason why. You don't pay for things unless you're getting something in return, especially not in business.
No. Well, that's that sort of disparity, isn't it, of wealth and poverty. You know, austerity is higher than it's ever been. It's like, it's now getting as bad as it was when it was like World War II. All right, we've not got like buildings falling down because we've got bombs dropping on them, but you know, but back then they had community spirit, and what people have done is they've divided communities. I say this a lot because there used to be a time when communities were built around churches. Churches are now built inside communities, but there used to be a time when communities were built around churches. You know, my town has an abbey, you know, one of the most beautiful buildings in the country. They were built around churches because the church used to take on that role where poverty was.
Well, I think what's happened now as well, I think you've said it yourself, is that the old rule of thumb, divide and conquer. Communities have been decimated. Communities have been decimated, but not just communities decimated. I think we've lost our sense of national identity and our own history and our own culture in a climate of everything now has got to be so politically correct that we have to learn everybody else's culture and respect everybody else's culture and religion, which I'm all for. But then we also have to be taught to respect and our own culture and our own religions in this country. And I think in terms of the church, I don't think the church done itself any favours in light of recent scandals. I don't think they were outspoken enough. I don't think they've done enough to repair their image, as it were. And I don't think now that there's enough emphasis in the young people on the spiritual or on the religious. And it is sad. Society is becoming very secular. A famous philosopher once said, a man without God or a man without religion is a dangerous man. And in the past, I'm not saying religion hasn't had its faults, but every person, whether you're an atheist, whether you believe in a God, whether you don't, everybody believes in some form of spirit, because we are spiritual beings at the end of the day. It's something we can't be denied. We all believe we have a spirit. You know, I believe I have a spirit. I don't know about the hereafter or whatever else. For me, it's a win-win. If you die and there's nothing, you don't know nothing about it. So it's a win-win. And if there is something and you've done as best you can while you're here, and it's never too late to repair your own personal damage, then who knows? It's a win-win, isn't it? That's the way I see it.
It is, you know. I think faith is an important thing. For me, it is anyway.
It's the antidote to fear.
Yeah, I'd rather be faithful than fearful.
It's the antidote to fear, Jack.
Yeah. You know, for me, faith is a reason. I've seen so many miracles, it's so hard for me to deny. You know, we as a family, we live on faith to a certain extent where it comes to money. If I need shoes, I will pray for shoes. To a point where, you know, my shoes were falling apart. You know, like I say, when I'm not ill, I can walk up to 10K a day around my town, and my shoes go very, very quickly. And, you know, it's literally been, I've prayed for shoes on the Saturday because they're probably not going to last till the Monday. I've walked into church and then somebody's walked up to me with a bag of shoes saying, "Oh, my son was clearing his wardrobe out, and I thought you might like these. It's a bag of shoes,
Oh,
all my
brilliant.
size. You know, um, when I pray, coincidences happen.
Brilliant.
When I don't, they still happen. So, like you say, who am I to disbelieve?
Well, the wise say a faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. And I believe that. And they also say faith without works is dead. You know, where people say God helps those that help themselves, there's actually another part to that. God helps those that help themselves to help others. You know, if your sole purpose is to help others, be it through, that's why I do what I do. You know, my own experience, my past has become my greatest asset. I use it to try and benefit others, to try and carry a message. I'm not in control of whether anyone gets anything from it. That's none of my business. But in doing so, I get my rewards. And my rewards are not what I've got financially. My rewards are not what I've got in business. That stuff's important, but it's not the be all and end all. My rewards are, remember what I spoke about in the beginning, my contract between me and my own higher power, my own understanding of that, and how I feel in me and how I feel that relationship's going. That's my reward. Anything else is a bonus. It's all just illusion. It's none of it's real. None of it means anything because you can't take any of it with you when you go. But what you can take is what you've built up inside. You know, that's what goes with you.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we before we went live, we were talking about faith and recovery and illness and recovery. But we both sort of battle different disabilities and stuff like that. And I tend not to take anything stronger than paracetamol and ibuprofen. You know, I often say I survive on paracetamol and prayer, which I do. With all the things that I've got wrong with me. You know, I was talking to a lady on Live and Undrugged a week or so ago, and she was involved in a really bad car accident so she was dealing with a really bad neurological disorder that made her shake really, really badly. And she was telling me about these socks. And I was like, socks? How do socks like sort pain out? But she's made this, she was 15, 20 grand in debt, whatever, living in America through medical bills, and then she got to know about this product, and they're socks. You know what? These during the day and these at night, and they're basically they're wearable neurological tech. So they've got these patterns here, and inside, and what happens is they sit on certain nerves, and it's basically like a QR code to reset your body. So it helps you deal with pain, or chronic pain on a better level. I'm going to give these a try.
Why not?
There is a link on the page. But you were telling me that even in recovery, if you need morphine, you will do morphine. I can't do that. I know I'll get addicted to it, but
not through choice. I mean, when I was in hospital,
yeah,
and I was in there for 11 days, and I actually got sepsis of the bowel. My bowel, because I've got Crohn's disease, my bowel actually went into septic shock. My internal organs actually started shutting down. I was in a really bad way. I was on a drip for 11 days, etc., etc. But I was in such chronic pain. I had to have intravenous morphine for like 5 or 6 days, and I was okay with that. I didn't actually like the feeling. It wasn't. But I knew, I was in the right place and in the right care, and I came out of that, unscathed. I had no desire to go off and start bloody using drugs again. It was, it's just one of them things. It's, I mean, I think, I've witnessed people in recovery. That's something that a lot of people don't have experience of, illness in recovery. And when you've been clean for multiple years, like I have, and you're getting older, we break down. We're a genetic human organism. And if things start going wrong, sometimes we need to be medicated. And my take on it is this: with the right intention and with support. If it's needed, it's needed. You know, I don't. You know, it's each to their own. But I know somebody who had palliative care. They was dying of cancer. A very good friend of mine a few years back. And he'd been clean nearly 30 years, and towards the end, there was no alternative. He was in that much pain. He was absolutely riddled. It spread to all throughout his body. He was he was basically just doped to his eyeballs. But and, you know, as far as I was concerned, you know, he was still in recovery. You know, his intention was pure. You know,
no, nobody wants to be in pain to that.
Oh,
That's daft.
It was horrific to see.
Yeah, I bet I've seen people sort of wither away. You know, that to the point. You know, if I was terminally ill and you know I was in palliative care, then yeah, probably I would. I think it's through stubbornness more than anything, and I do know that God can heal, and I do have a faith that God can heal, and He has sort of healed various ailments from my body, and you know, He healed my knee and my arm and stuff like that. But I think that in recovery, it's a personal thing.
Of course.
What happens for one person, you can't say for another person, because it's a personal journey, isn't it? And
most definitely. And none of us are doctors, first and foremost. None of us are experts on any of this stuff. All we've got is our own personal experience. And you know, I would certainly never, ever, ever, I'm a great advocate in this, you know. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone in recovery wasn't prone to any form of secondary illness? Wouldn't it be wonderful? But it's not. It's not like that. We're human. And people suffer from secondary conditions. We have people in recovery who have got perhaps some mental disorders and whatever. And they need to be medicated. And I don't think, and I've seen this, and I'm an advocate of this, and I've told people, and I've spoke out against it numerous times, never, ever, ever contradict the professionalism of doctors, psychiatrists, and these people. That is their department. It's not for us to start telling people to stop taking their meds. And do you know why I say that? Here's a story. Years ago, there was a recovery meeting. I won't say where. It was in a part of southwest London. And a certain group bullied someone to come off of his psychotic medication. They said he doesn't need it. He's using it just because of his illness or whatever else. He jumped off a bridge under a lorry on a motorway. That was the outcome. You know, he needed his medication. He was suffering from a form of schizophrenia, but people told him and bullied him to come off his meds because they said it's mood altering. It wasn't. He was on it because of his secondary illness. That's my take on it, you know. So it's not for any of us to be the arbiter of anyone's medical history or what they need, or, you know, you are as you say you are. You know, I've been in meetings with people who have been on methadone for 10 years but not use any other substance, and as far as they're concerned, they're clean. And I look them in the eye and I say, if you're clean, you're clean. And then you've got your hardliners who say, yeah, but you're still on that. You know, if it's a lesser of two evils and they feel clean and they're on their own journey, good fucking luck to you. Exactly. You know, I'm not going to criticize anyone. I'm not God. What is the first thing it says in recovery? We quit playing God. And do you know there is only two crimes in recovery? And that is this: messing with somebody else's and messing with your own. That's the two crimes. You know, you let the big fella do the work, and the more you tap into that and have that faith that you said, the more things tend to go how they're meant to be. And in my own experience, I'm fast becoming the person I was always meant to be. I'm not there yet, and I'm not complacent, and it's an ongoing process. But I'm so far removed from the person I once was through making a few right decisions as opposed to going with a few bad ones, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm on antidepressants. You know, they do help. I'm on other medication that I need for various ailments that I have. I would never not take my medication. No. You know, if I did, it would kill me quite quickly. I'm in no doubt about that. When I say God heals, I believe that God helps with medical advancements. He helps bring these ideas into fruition. He helps bring in pharmaceuticals that need to be brought in that tackle illnesses. I believe that God is in medicine.
Well, there's this conflict, isn't there? There always seems to be this conflict between science and religion. Now, the two can coexist quite greatly, as far as I'm concerned. For me, you cannot believe in a God or a supreme being of a higher power and not believe in science, because I believe that we are the eyes and ears of that creative intelligence. And I believe a lot of these medical breakthroughs like vaccines and operations and how they can treat ailments and all that, I believe these are God-given. You know, some of these miracles that we see, medical miracles, you know, if we believe God created man, then man created these, you know, and there's a fine line, I know, and some people take to extremities, but science and religion can coexist quite comfortably. I'm very scientific, but I you know, I've got no problem with religion.
Well, no, a lot of the science came from the Bible anyway. If you look at it in context, you know, all you have to do is listen to people like Hugh Ross, that actually gives how it, you know, if you go onto YouTube, type in Hugh Ross reasons to believe, and he does some very good lectures on the science behind the Bible. You know, and this is a man that grew up in the Canadian Canadian education system, so they have to do science when they're like 8, 9 years old, and he decided when he was a teenager that he was going to read every religious book on the planet. He started with the Quran and finished with the Bible. And when he finished reading the Bible, he decided that the Bible was real, and that the science was real. And he explains how, and about how the days are set out and how it reads in the Bible. I'm not bright enough for that. I just know that I listen to men like that, and he knows what he's talking about. And there's a lot of science that is backed up in the Bible, but there's, you know,
I mean, I seldom talk about religion because I believe it's a very personal thing. I'm against organised religion in such, because I believe there's too much conflict in organised religion, and I believe, you know, if you believe in Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, one of the things Jesus said to Peter was, "Upon you, Peter, I build my church," and what he meant by that, people misconstrue that and think that what he meant was, big organised religion. Well, we know from what Jesus done in the temple, when he smashed the temple up, he hated organised religion himself. What he meant is, I build my church within you, within man. And it was about you having your own personal relationship with him, and with, you know, that was what Jesus actually taught. He's not against going and praying as a collective and all this sort of stuff, but I do believe it's wrong to indoctrinate. I believe it's wrong that to indoctrinate your belief of God onto someone else, and I believe it's wrong to do that to children, but I believe they should be given the tools to search for themselves. And I think people who find their own path and find their own relationship with whatever their comprehension, these are the best sort of people, because they find, you know, people who preach are people who tend to still be searching. You know, there's the searchers, and when you're people who are not searching anymore, who've sort of found something powerful, don't feel the need to preach. You know, because it's attraction rather than promotion. Let my actions speak louder than my words. You know, don't do as I say, do as I do. If you want what I've got, do what I do. That's what I say to people. You know, today from. You know, basically a fool in society, Jack. You know, I was, you know, at one point an armed robber, a drug smuggler, involved in all sorts of organised crime. You know, once Britain's most wanted man, spent most of my life in prison. So today, being a successful businessman, an author, you know, I employ people, I do a lot of charity work, I do a lot of this stuff, and I don't get involved in crime in any shape or form. You know, if you want what I've got, do what I do. That's what I say to people. You know, that's the secret.
It is. I mean, I love the church. Don't get me wrong. I love the church. I'm very church orientated. I have
nothing wrong with it.
Church. You know, they were there for me when I was in hospital. And this was 8 years ago, pretty much to the day. You know, I look on my Facebook now and it goes from 7 years ago to 9 years ago. There's nothing in between, because this was when I thought I'd caused the end of the world. I had this virulent strain of tuberculosis that nearly killed me. I thought I'd spread it. I thought I'd created this Armageddon. So I wouldn't talk to people. I went mute. My fight or flight was, when I would get arrested, it would be just to go mute and not say a word and call people not very nice things.
I think churches are great and they serve a great purpose. I'm not knocking churches in any sense or form. What I disagree with in a lot of respects is the organisation of religion, where in the sense that the conflict where one religion says we're right, you're wrong, and the intolerance amongst other religions, and you know, if you went to for example, a desert island in the Pacific, and we found indigenous people who had never been indoctrinated with any form of religion, you will find that they will have their own form of religion and their own form of spirituality. And when you look at mankind today, you know, we've been on this earth 1 million years. You know, we have only had these senses of organized religion over the last 2,000 years. Well, I think one of the oldest is a form of Hinduism and Buddhism. They're the oldest, but prior to that, we have hundreds of thousands of years of spirituality and spiritual beliefs, and there was no real organization. You know, and it's sort of morphed itself now to, you have to be part of a club, you have to be part of a collective, and it's like it's like football, it's Tarsfield, it's in-group, out-group hostility. One group of fans hate another group of fans, but they'll be in the workplace tomorrow, best of buddies. It's inbuilt in us, and it's that which is creating a lot of problems in this fucking world. You know, if people just could go, you know what, who knows who's right? Who knows who's right? It's what's important to you.
I mean, this is where you've got to look at the definition of church. You know, for me anyway, I believe that Jesus came to abolish religion. You know,
well, he did.
He did, because there's religious spirit. That's the problem with religion. I'm not religious. I'm Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I get that. I get that.
He came, and you've got your core beliefs, and you look at church, and for a long time it was, you know, when you look at certain religions today, they're work-based religions. The more work you do, the more you give, the more you do, the better chance you have to get into heaven. Yeah. Whereas I believe that once you accept God into your life, then, you know, and you look at why Christ came, then you see that he came to be that barrier between and die for us. You know, all of this I understand. I used to view church as a museum for good people, you know, where you would go to see good people in the elites of society. But actually, if you look at church, it should be a hospital for broken people.
Yeah. Some of the most evil people in the world are children of God. That's the be all and end all, because it's used and abused in a lot of people, a lot of warmongers, a lot of people who make these decisions to send people to war, claim to be men of God. That's my gripe with it. You know, it's used and exploited in the wrong way. The Vatican Church, for example, which is one of the richest organisations in the world, you know, the head of the Catholic Church, it all came to light that they had money invested in the arms trade and all sorts. I mean, now, you know, forgive me for seeming a little bit pessimistic, but, you know, I am a man of, I consider myself a man of God, my own understanding of God. Yeah. You know, I've denounced violence in every form. And the one thing I certainly would not be doing personally is investing any money I had in instruments of death, like missiles and military grade weapons and whatever else, what the Vatican Bank was doing. I mean, that for me just stinks of hypocrisy. I can't handle the fact that a lot of churches are sitting on vast pools of wealth, vast pools of land, and yet we got homeless people in the streets, and we have empty churches, and not just churches, People criticise the churches. Empty mosques, empty synagogues, empty Hindu temples, empty all these places of so-called religious do-good faith. And yet we have people sleeping on the streets in the fucking snow, forgive my language, in the winter time when they could open their doors. And I know a lot of churches and things do, but they don't all do it, Jack. They don't all do it. And it's hypocrisy. It's pure, simple hypocrisy.
It is. You've got your bigger churches, and then you've got your sort of community churches.
They won't do it at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Well, no, because I mean, there are a lot of churches are set up in a way where they're charities, and they're bound by certain rules. And yes, they can open their doors when it comes to things like emergencies and stuff like that, and getting people off the street when they need to. And there are, I do believe that there are certain church halls and that are open in London that have so many spaces at night. They open at night for people to sleep. But you have to get there for a certain time. And, in other places around the country as well, I think that there are a few that do it, but there are so many that don't do that. Or not do anything within the community, and they're just bothered about keeping their building. And the church isn't the building, even though it's a beautiful building. It's not the building; it's the people inside it. When Jesus said, "Peter, I build my church upon you," he meant the people.
Yeah, of course. It's like a collective.
Not the building. What does church mean? You look at the word church. I think it's something like was it Episcopalian or something like that, and it means storehouse.
Yeah.
Back then, so that's where they would store their gold relics and things like that. And
I mean, I've been on quite a spiritual and religious quest over the years, Jack, that I keep secret. I don't really talk a lot about it, but I'm like that guy you said. I studied a lot of different religions. I've studied Buddhism, Taoism. I've looked into Judaism. I looked into Islam. I looked into Christianity, and they've all got their pluses. They've all got their faults. I'm not knocking any one religion. I'm really not. And it is a thing like, when I say about church, they say this is the house of God. It's not the house of God. It's a church. The house of God is within you. It's within me. A church can you go and you pray with people and have that collective commune. That's what it is. Jesus was a carpenter. He wasn't. He didn't live in a big, super church with gold, this and that. He didn't. And I get the need to have these places, to give it that, but it's the same as a castle. A castle was there built to intimidate, and a church was built for the same reason. But it was designed to intimidate spiritually. If you want my humble opinion in terms of Christianity, the only one group that I've seen that have a true knowledge of first century Christianity and the Bible are Jehovah's Witnesses, but people don't give them the time of day, and they see them as a threat. Do you know why? Because they don't work out of the King James Bible. The King James Bible was translated by King James to serve, it was all warped and twisted to serve basically the establishment and the monarchs of the day, to say that kings and queens are divine beings and all this sort of stuff. And it was really faulted and twisted. If you go back to actual first century Christianity, which was what the old Oxford groups used to be, where the whole recovery program initially came from, and you go back to like the old monasteries, and you go back to what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach in the Bible, you'll find it's very, very different than conventional Christianity. They for example, like Mother Mary, they don't worship Jesus on a cross. They don't that's a Catholic thing. I mean, the Church of England don't do that either, but they don't worship Mary as being the mother of God. How can Mary be the mother of God? Do you see what I'm saying? There's all these facets that are very contradictory and were actually implemented. There's no historical records to support any of this stuff. Only the Old Testaments, and in some of the New Testament, this was all King James. This was all in the King James era of Reformation. It's all been twisted. If you want to study proper Christianity, go to the Oxford groups. Go listen to the Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, it's they got a really good take on it.
Yeah, I find, like I say about they don't take medication and things like that, or blood transfusions. That I find God, I believe God is very much in the medical community. Now my granddad came from an Amish community.
Yeah.
Not Philadelphia. What's the other one beginning with P? Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
Now, and his family came over in 1898.
That's like they look like Abraham Lincoln, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah, because they were all they were Amish. They came over with the Quaker movement.
Yeah.
Which is again a sort of, I won't say purer form, but a sort of a different form of Christianity that looks at, that's more, that work with the land and things like that.
Yeah, Puritans.
Yeah, more Puritan, yeah. And, he brought those beliefs into my dad's. My dad wasn't religious or isn't religious in any way, but, we were brought up, I was brought up in, before I went to special school, in Christian schools, in schools that used to sit in assembly, banging out the Jesus tunes, Morning Has Broken and all that, and doing the Lord's Prayer. And it's not like that anymore. And I think it's really sad.
I do think it's sad that we've lost. I mean, that children nowadays tend to be very ungodly. They don't really have any concept of religion, and it's sad. And I think it's because it's because of this political correctness. We've been decimated culturally, that in the schools now, they don't want to teach religion because the schools are so diverse. And I'm not knocking, again, it's a fine line. And what I'm not saying here is that because they're diverse, we shouldn't teach everyone's religion. That's not what I'm saying, but I think they're too scared now. We've gone too PC. At the end of the day, this is predominantly, England was predominantly a Christian country, and I think first and foremost that is the basis of our society, and that should be taught in schools. That's not to say we shouldn't be taught tolerance of other religions and give them the right to have their religions and learn something of their religions. Indeed. But in amongst it, we've lost our own.
Yeah, that I do agree with. It's like schools now focus on physical health and mental health, but to be whole, it needs to be the Trinity. It needs to be physical health, mental health, spiritual health, because we need that. And whether that spiritual health is having no religion whatsoever,
well, what people don't actually understand, Jack, is when people speak about depression, about endogenous and exogenous depression, you understand that. And anyone who does listen to this or now or at a later date, exogenous being relationship breakdown, money problems, endogenous being an internal biological, pathological condition that can be treated medically and with therapy. But what people don't understand is that when they get depressed or feel down, there is a form of depression called spiritual depression. We are a spiritual being. And if we neglect our spirit and just worry about the physical and mental, like you say, we can become spiritually depressed. And you see it in later life predominantly when a lot of old people become depressed, especially older people who don't have religion or don't have a God. They become spiritually depressed. What was my whole life about? And they know they're approaching the end of life and all this sort of stuff, and they say, I'm depressed or I can't cope. And a lot of them are actually just spiritually depressed. And that is why we need to teach spirit. We need to. And teach people that it exists first and foremost.
Yeah, exactly. We're emotional beings. We were made to be emotional beings. We're also made to be spiritual beings.
And social.
and social beings, yeah. But there is that connection between spirit and emotion, because
Most definitely.
they're very much linked together. And I think that's why I don't go to meetings anymore. I find them really difficult. I do meetings online if I need to. I read the book and I speak to people like yourself.
Yeah.
Because the best thing about, these, they're full of addicts and alcoholics, and the worst thing is they're full of addicts and alcoholics, and people are inevitably flawed.
Well, you'd be sitting in a meeting full of sick people trying to get well.
Yeah, I've been to meetings where they've been selling heroin outside. And then they've been sat in there banging on about these 12 steps and 12 traditions, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you go and sit with sick people, you're going to stay sick. So I needed to get out of that. It was driving me into a place where it was going to kill me. But you look at the Oxford movement where Ebby found all these bits of treasure that he took back to Bill W. And then Bill, this stockbroker trying to stop drinking, lost everything in the crash, ended up in a hotel and wanted to speak to someone else. So he went to see a doctor who was dying of liver failure.
Yeah.
And they became the founders of, the Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah. Well, the Oxford groups, what actually happened, the 12 steps came about because in the Oxford groups had something which was called the 6 tenements. And the 6 tenements were basically the 12 steps. But Bill W knew that they would be too hard for alcoholics to palate because there was these 6 really rigid tenements. And basically he split them into 12 to make them more palatable. There actually was 13 at first. And when the first 100 wrote the book, they disregarded one of the steps. So it became the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how it actually happened. And what actually happened with the Oxford groups destroyed themselves by affiliation. And do you know what they'd done? They endorsed Adolf Hitler. Inadvertently, when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor in 1933 in Germany, the Oxford groups endorsed the Nazi Party movement because they had yet at that time to come out with all the real heavy far-right social Darwinistic stuff with persecution of races and Jews and people with genetic impurities, and et cetera, that had yet to come out. And it, as a movement, an industrialist social ideology in the beginning, the Oxford groups affiliated themselves with it, and that's what destroyed the Oxford groups.
Yep.
They inadvertently signed their own death knell by affiliating themselves. And that's why the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the traditions, it says we do not affiliate ourselves with any outside organisation or enterprise. And that is why, because of the experience of the Oxford groups. The Oxford groups were fantastic because the Oxford group, the 6 tenements, were about religious conversion. And although we say the 12 steps, whichever way you look at it, you say it's about relapse prevention or whatever else, the 12 steps is actually about religious conversion. It's 12 steps to follow towards religious conversion in terms of your own religious conversion, be it spiritual. He knew, Bill, if he said to people religious, people would have gone, whoa. Because most people who, being a man of God or it doesn't give you immunity from alcoholism or drug addiction. There's plenty of priests in AA, and if you say to them, you're an alcoholic because you haven't got God, they'll probably punch you on the nose.
Yeah.
No, that's not their problem. Their problem is they don't have God. Their problem is they didn't know how to use it in the right way. And this is my experience of having a God and a spiritual understanding. It's okay you can believe in God. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's about your relationship with that God. That's the difference. God helps those that help themselves to help others.
Yeah. Try not to be an arsehole, basically.
Basically. And we're gonna make mistakes. We're human, Jack. We're human.
Of course. I've made them, and I've got I've got involved in things that in gossip and bitching at other people, and it's just dragged me down, and it's you've got to realize that people have got their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm quite trusting. I try to be. I try to be as honest and open as I can. And I give chance upon chance upon chance. And people, they do step on you. They do try to use you. It's a sad state of affairs. But I think it's a matter of putting on the big boy pants spiritually and just
And
getting
don't
on with
dilute,
it.
yeah, and don't dilute your own message. It says in the
Exactly.
big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you can't transmit what you haven't got, and that's why I do sometimes look at certain podcasts and things like that. And when I see certain guests or whatever, I think, your message is diluted. You can't transmit what you haven't got. If you are a man of light and you are pure and you are open and honest, and you can go, look, yeah, I ain't perfect, I'm far from it, and all that stuff, you're going to be more, language of the heart. That what doesn't come from the heart doesn't reach the heart, pure and simple.
Indeed.
And you can see it in the eyes. They say that is Bill. What it was the first thing Bill W said about Ebby. When Ebby, if you know the story of when Ebby came and sat with Bill at that table, what was the first thing Bill W said in the book? He said there was something different about him. It was in his eyes.
Yeah.
Now when you see someone in drug addiction or alcoholism or mental health, you look in their eyes. The eyes are the window to the soul. You can see the pain, you can see the suffering, you can see the death in them. When someone's got freedom, when someone's got spirit, when someone's got a belief and a faith that works for them, their eyes are alive. They're a light. You can see it. You can't transmit what you haven't got.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think everybody, whether you're an addict or not, could do with having a look at the 12 steps, really. But they're a good way to live. Prayer is a good way to live, even if you don't believe in God or Jesus or whatever. It's a good way to live because it puts you in the right state of mind.
Meditation is too, because it's about
prayer and meditation.
The listening part. We can
pray
pray, and if we pray in the right way, pray for the health and well-being of others, and listen. Everything's there. And you'll probably identify with this, Jack. I look back at my life and the crazy life I've lived, and I've been in some real fucking shitholes. I've sat in segregation units by myself in dark, cold cells. In a couple of instances, I've had a hiding off of prison officers, and I'm basically sitting there beat up and semi-naked. They took all my clothes, saying, "Oh, it's for your own protection. Stop you hanging yourself." So I'm in freezing bloody cold in a block cell in Exeter on one occasion with no fucking window, freezing cold. Cuddling up in the corner to try and get some warmth. I've been in them places. And it's. I look at all that, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is even in that instance, I can still say there was evidence of a power working in my life, because all these experience I went through, it was always there, but I wasn't able to listen. I wasn't able to see it. And it's only now retrospectively, I look back on my life and think there was always something. I mean, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I should be dead. I've lived that life where I've had firearms, where I've had police chases where they could have shot me. I've come out of armed robberies where the police could have shot me. I've been in instances where someone has tried to shoot me, and I've been stabbed before. And I've had all these experiences, not to mention I've forgotten the amount of people that were close to me that have died from drug addiction, and people that have been murdered or took their own life. It's only now at 51 years of age, I can look today and say, I'm more awake. I've had an awakening of the spirit, a spiritual awakening, where I can see these things now working in my life as and when they do, as opposed to having to wait and go, oh yeah, he was working in my life then. I can see it as it's happening. Sometimes God doesn't always give us what we want, but he will give us what we need, as long as we're open and receptive to that, And there's been many instances over the last few years where I could have quite easily taken an easier path. Like, some people say, is another wise saying, slow money's better than no money. And in the beginning, when I started my business, I could have bent the rules. I could have evaded tax. I could have, but I knew that would set me on the same path to take me to the same place it always has. Shortcuts, breaking the law, doing all that stuff leads to one fucking place: self-destruction. It might take a little bit longer to get there, but that's where it ends up. You know, when I first come out of jail, I had someone say to me, "Oh, look, I'll set you up. I'll give you a couple of key of coke. Just go to work with that." And I was like, and I had nothing when I came out of jail originally. I thought, yeah. But I knew if I'd done that, I was back in the game. And I didn't. And I went, no. And I literally had £300 on my name, Jack. And I didn't know where my next bit of money was coming from. And I made that last me enough till I got a little bit of work. I was very fortunate. I got a bit of work, and I worked and I saved, and I worked and I saved, and I worked and I saved. My uncle gave me £8,000 towards starting a business and whatever. And I basically started my business with maybe £14,000-15,000 today. You know, I don't know what my business is worth, but I suppose if I was to sell it, I'd probably get well over £1 million for it. So it's there you go. It's because I've done it the right way.
Yeah. Do you think that you were lucky to? It was Grendon, wasn't it, that you were in? That you did.
I spent 3.5 years there doing therapy, which was very tough. Yeah, very tough.
Is it? You know, you hear horror stories about Grendon and stuff, that it's got some of the biggest scourges of society. But yeah, I was talking about this with Kevin Lane and Frank Portinari, that you know there needs to be more sort of therapy in prisons and teaching in prisons.
But this is
the right model.
I have to say, there's a certain ignorance around it. When Grendon was first opened, it was open for people who are actually mentally challenged, people who, it wasn't just for sex offenders and things like that, which we know it had that reputation for having a lot. It wasn't about that. It was for people who were mentally challenged and people who were, there was a lot of people in the system. They went down that road of like, we need to help these people. And what actually happened in 2004, I was a category A prisoner up in maximum security prison, and a new therapeutic prison had opened called Dovegate. So the numbers in Grendon had gone really down because so many people were opting for the new modern therapeutic one in Dovegate, especially the northern prisoners and whatever else. So it was in danger of closing. So what they actually done is they said, let's start to see if this helps normal lifers, normal armed robbers, normal villains. You had to be serving sentence of over 10 years, and let's see if it can work for them. So I was very fortunate. When I went there was 5 wings, and out of the 5 wings, there was only 1 wing there with sex offenders on, and that was G wing. But that's no different than any other prison. At least you know who they are. When you're in maximum security prisons, you could be on the wing with them and not know. If you don't know that person, you don't know the facts of their case, you don't know what they are. At least there, everyone knows what everyone's in for, because you have to. That's part of the therapeutic process. You sit on a group and you have to give a CV of yourself, your criminality, what you're in for. So if you're in for anything suspect, you got to say. And fortunately for me, I was on a wing where there wasn't any of them people, because I didn't want to take the risk with people like myself, Razor Smith, Freddie Lunn, John Mindale. These are all proper hardened cons with a lot of history in prisons and high security prisons. They couldn't take the risk of putting us around them people. We weren't ready for that, and I certainly wasn't ready for it. I think if I'd have been on a wing with a rapist or a child killer, so I couldn't. Where I was in life at that time, I couldn't say that I wouldn't have attacked them, because I have in the past, and perhaps I would have done. Today, it's just not my business. I let God deal with that stuff. But I was very fortunate that when I went on the wing, it was all what I would call sort of straight going cons, and we helped each other through. Yeah, so it wasn't, it's got that stigma, but that comes from ignorance. You would have to actually go there and be educated. So I'm an advocate of it because it helped me, and I've seen it help a lot of other people. So anyone who I would advise anyone to at least give it a go. What you got to lose? What you got to lose?
Exactly. Education is key, really, isn't it?
You know, and I do write to ex-prisoners, and when I go and do talks in prison sometimes, I'm open and honest about it. And I suggest it to people. I say, well, go and give it a go. If you're genuine about change and you want a better life, you know, You've got to have exhausted that life, Jack, and I'd exhausted it. If it was fun and I was earning loads of money and everyone in it was brilliant and whatever, but let's not be under no illusion. You know, I've lived that criminal life right from the age of 11, 12 years old, young offenders institutions, approved schools, you know, YOIs, maximum security prisons. I've done the fucking lot. And there's a lot of stuff I've done this I'll never talk about, but I've been convicted of armed robbery, firearms, escaping from custody, smuggling. You know, I've been through the mill. Let's be under no illusions. In crime and criminality, you are used and abused, and you use and abuse. I'm not knocking anyone in it. There's a lot of good people in it. There's a lot of people that's their lot. That's what they want to be. But there's also a lot of people in it that are better than that and need to know they're better than that. There's a lot of people who got into crime through circumstance like I did, and it just took me a long time to get out of it. But let's paint no illusions. Crime does not pay. Does not pay. Unless you're a politician or one of the establishment, because in my humble opinion, some of the crimes they commit, and we've witnessed it with the PPE crisis and with the murder of people basically in during COVID, we've witnessed that, you know. I think they're fucking criminals. But you know, I've come through that now. I've come through that, and I'm a great believer in it. And I'll always say crime doesn't pay. No matter how much money you make in it, you know, they'll take it away. And what good is any of that stuff? You live your life, a whole criminal, your whole life. For what? For what? For when you get old to say, what have you really achieved in life? What have you contributed to the world? Because my take on it is I hit a place where I wanted to say, you know what? I've spent my whole life taking from society. Now I'm going to spend a bit of time giving back and doing something constructive, so I can meet my maker one day, look him in the eye and go, I got it wrong in the beginning, but I turned the corner and I got it right. You know?
I think that's all any of us can want, isn't it?
I don't think I can really say much more than that, Jack, because I've got to go and pick her up from work.
No, I understand that, mate. I understand that. I want to go spend some time with the wife. Get the kids in bed properly and stuff. But thank you ever so much for doing this.
It's been an honour and a privilege. Always is, Jack. And please, from me, never be disheartened in anything you're doing. You know, you're a good man. The light shines through you and you will get to where you need to be.
That means a lot, mate. That means a lot. I genuinely love doing this. I love speaking to people, and I love getting that combined wisdom and that shared wisdom. I think it's important. Guys,
and you're good at it. You're good at it.
Thank you.
I've done a few podcasts, good few podcasts, and you're good at it, Jack.
Over 100 now, and I'm just about getting comfortable with it. I love it. Thank you, guys. I'm going to cut the feed now, but thank you, guys.
Thank you, anyone who's watched or anyone who's going to watch on feedback, playback. I wish you all well. Cheers, guys.